The night before my wedding, I found out my fiancé and my best friend had been lying to me for 8 months. Not a suspicion. Not a gut feeling I couldn't shake. Proof. A text chain on Ryan's phone that I only saw because he left it face up on the bathroom counter while he was in the shower, and his screen lit up with a message from Jess that said, "Tomorrow's going to be the hardest day of your life. But after that, we're free." I stood in that bathroom in my hotel robe, hair still in curlers from the rehearsal dinner, and I read every message going back to October. Ryan Calloway, 31, my fiancé of 2 years, the man I'd moved to Vancouver for, and Jessica Holt, 30, my best friend since second year at Queen's University, the woman who'd helped me pick out my dress 4 months earlier, who'd cried in the bridal boutique and said she'd never seen me look so beautiful. The messages were detailed in a way that made me go very still. They weren't impulsive. They'd planned what they would say to me, practiced it. Ryan was going to tell me after the ceremony. After. He thought it would be cleaner that way. Let me have the wedding, then break it off before the reception dinner wound down. Jess had talked him out of it. Said that was cruel. So they'd agreed he'd tell me in the morning. The morning of our wedding. I put the phone back exactly where it was. I went to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my wedding dress, hanging on the back of the door. This ivory thing I'd spent 4 months finding, and I thought, they are not going to do this to me. I am going to do it first. My brother Owen, he's 34, 2 years older than me, a general contractor who drives a truck that smells permanently of sawdust, was staying in the room down the hall with his wife, Patrice. I called him at 11:30 at night. He answered on the second ring. "I need you to come to my room," I said. Something happened. He didn't ask questions. That's the thing about Owen. He's never once in his life made me explain myself before deciding to show up. He was at my door in 4 minutes. I showed him the texts. He read them the way he reads everything. Slowly, methodically, his jaw getting tighter with every scroll. When he put the phone down, he said, "What do you want to do? Not are you okay? Not are you sure this is real? Just, what do you want to do?" I said I wanted to leave before Ryan woke up. I wanted to be gone before he had the chance to deliver whatever speech he'd rehearsed. Owen called Patrice. Patrice came and helped me pack my overnight bag and wrap my dress back in its garment bag in silence. At 2 in the morning, the three of us took a cab to Owen's place in East Van, and I sat in his kitchen while Patrice made tea. Neither of us drank, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since our dad died. This ugly, airless kind of crying where you can't catch your breath between waves. Ryan called at 6:47 in the morning. I didn't answer. He called 11 more times. Jess called twice. I blocked both of them and handed my phone to Patrice. I didn't speak to either of them again for 8 years. Here's what I want you to understand about the aftermath, because people always assume the hardest part is the wedding day itself. It's not. The wedding day was just the detonation. The fallout lasted much longer. Ryan and I had a joint lease on an apartment in Kitsilano. My name was on it too, which meant I had the legal right to be there. But walking back into that space 3 days later to get my things, with Owen beside me because I wasn't ready to do it alone, and seeing Jess already there, her jacket on the hook where mine used to be, her coffee cup on the counter, that was its own specific kind of devastation. She tried to talk to me. I looked at her once, then looked away, and I didn't speak. I'd also been working as a junior associate at a mid-size architecture firm in downtown Vancouver, a job I'd gotten largely through connections in Ryan's professional circle. He was a project manager at a development company, and while no one explicitly told me to leave, the dynamic became untenable fast. Ryan's company was a client of our firm. Within 6 weeks, I understood that staying wasn't something I could do without slowly erasing myself. I gave notice. I took my savings, $4,200, which was embarrassingly little for a 32-year-old with a professional degree, and I called my former professor from architecture school, a woman named Dr. Elaine Forsyth, who'd once told me I had an unusually strong spatial instinct, and I asked her if she knew anyone hiring outside of the Vancouver market. She did. A small firm in Calgary. Not glamorous. Residential renovations mostly. But the principal there, a man named Howard Chu, was willing to take a chance on someone who'd had an unconventional few months, as Elaine delicately put it, and I drove to Calgary in October with everything I owned in the back of Owen's truck. Owen drove me. He took 3 days off work to do it. I've never forgotten that. Calgary in winter is not gentle to anyone, let alone someone who's grieving and starting over. The cold there has a personality that Vancouver's doesn't. It doesn't dampen things, it clarifies them. I remember my first December there, walking to work in -20 weather, feeling the air burn the inside of my nose, and thinking, you can either hate this or you can decide this is what your new life feels like. I chose the second one. I'm not sure I had much of a choice. Howard was a patient boss. He taught me residential work from the ground up. Permits, city inspections, the particular language of talking homeowners through structural decisions they didn't fully understand. I wasn't good at the client-facing side at first. I'd always worked in commercial, where you're talking to developers and project managers, people who want specs and numbers. Talking to a couple about their kitchen felt almost too intimate, too small. But Howard kept putting me in those rooms until it became second nature. By my second year, I was running my own projects. By my third, I'd gotten my Alberta license and was fielding referrals on my own. By year 5, I incorporated Aldridge Studio, my mother's maiden name, a one-person operation out of a rented office above a cafe on 17th Avenue, but mine, entirely mine. The work was good. The work was also, for a long time, almost all I had. I made friends slowly, the way adults do in a new city, through colleagues, through the couple downstairs in my building, through a hiking out group. I joined more for the obligation of leaving my apartment than any genuine enthusiasm for the outdoors. I dated, cautiously. Nothing that lasted. I told myself I wasn't closed off, but I knew I was. I'd just learned to be subtle about it. Owen called every Sunday. Patrice sent me recipes I never made. My mother, who lived in Guelph and had been horrified by what Ryan had done in that way, she expressed everything. Quietly, with her hands clasped in her lap, called on my birthday every year and told me she was proud of me. I believed her. I didn't think about Ryan and Jess often. What I mean is, I'd trained myself not to. Occasionally something would surface, someone who knew them both, a mutual contact who didn't realize I wasn't in touch, and I'd get small updates I hadn't asked for. That they'd moved in together quickly, that Ryan had changed jobs. At some point, through a second-hand source, I heard they'd gotten married. I felt nothing specific about this. Or I told myself I felt nothing specific, which is probably not the same thing. What I was, mostly, was busy. And after a while, busy became something else, became genuinely, specifically absorbed in what I was building. The invitation arrived on a Thursday in late September, 8 years after I'd left Vancouver. It came to my office address, which I found odd. I'd been careful about keeping that separation. But I assumed it had been forwarded through the alumni network somehow. Queen's University, class reunion, a weekend event in Kingston, Ontario, cocktail reception, dinner, the usual. I almost didn't go. I'd been back to Kingston once since graduation, for a conference, and it had felt strange, the way places from your past always do. Slightly smaller than you remember, like the scale was off. But Howard, who was semi-retired by then and called me occasionally to compare notes on projects, asked if I was going, and when I said probably not, he said, "Go. You've spent 8 years building things. Let someone see it." So I went. I'd flown to Toronto first to spend 2 nights with Owen and Patrice, who'd relocated there 4 years earlier when Owen's company expanded. Their house in Leslieville smelled like coffee, and the particular brand of hand soap Patrice had used since I'd known her. And I slept in the guest room with the weighted blanket Patrice had bought specifically for me. And, for the first time in months, I slept 8 hours without waking up. Owen drove me to Kingston. He was going to head back the same day, but he walked me to the hotel, carried my bag to the elevator, and hugged me in the hallway in the way he has. one hand on the back of my head, like I'm still 9 years old. "Call me if you need anything," he said. "I'm fine," I said. "I know," he said. "Call me anyway." The cocktail reception was in one of the old limestone buildings on campus, the kind with high ceilings and tall windows, and not enough light. I arrived slightly late on purpose when the room was already full enough that no single entrance would be noticed. I got a glass of wine. I found a former classmate named Bev, who'd gone into urban planning and was living in Ottawa. And we spent 45 minutes in a corner, catching up in the way that feels genuinely easy when neither of you has anything to prove. I'd been there about an hour when I saw Ryan. He was across the room, near the bar, talking to two men I didn't recognize. He'd put on weight in the way that some men do in their late 30s. Not dramatically, just settled, like he'd grown into a larger version of himself. He was wearing a blazer that was slightly too formal for the room. He hadn't seen me yet. I had a decision to make, and I made it in about 3 seconds. I was going to stand exactly where I was and let whatever was going to happen happen. I wasn't going to leave. I'd left once. That was enough. He saw me maybe 10 minutes later. I watched the recognition move across his face, the flicker of surprise, then something I couldn't quite name. He excused himself from the men he was with and walked toward me. I had one thought, "Here we go. Abby," he said. He still used the nickname. Nobody else had called me that in years. "I almost didn't recognize you, Ryan," I said. There was a pause. "You look well," he said. "Thank you." Another pause. He was working up to something, I could see it. "I've thought about reaching out," he said. "A lot of times, actually. I wanted to." "How's Jess?" I asked. Not to wound him, just to see. Something moved across his face. It's been a hard year, honestly." He looked down at his drink. "We separated about 14 months ago. I didn't say anything. She has some financial trouble, some business stuff. I don't really know the details anymore." He looked back up at me. "I'm not in Vancouver. I'm in Toronto now, actually. Consulting good," I said. I meant it in the most neutral possible way. He started talking then. Not a speech, exactly, but something that had probably been a speech at one point, and had been worn down to something more ragged through years of rehearsal that never found its moment. He said he'd been wrong. He said he knew that wasn't enough. He said he'd gotten caught up in something and made choices that couldn't be explained, only apologized for. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been sorry for a long time. I let him finish. I said, "I believe you." He looked almost reasonable. "But I want you to understand something," I said. "The person you left on the floor of that hotel bathroom, she doesn't live in me anymore. She left. I replaced her with someone who built an architecture firm from the ground up in a city where she didn't know anyone, and that person is doing very well, and she doesn't need this apology. But I'll accept it anyway, for her." Ryan stared at me. He looked like he was going to say something. He didn't. I excused myself, found Bev, and went in to dinner. What I didn't know, what I found out 2 weeks later, through a call from a former mutual contact named Sandra, who still had my number and thought I should hear it from someone I trusted, was that Jess's financial trouble was more specific than Ryan had made it sound. After I'd left Vancouver, Jess had eventually opened a series of wellness boutiques, the kind that sell expensive candles and $40 face serums and membership packages for yoga retreats. 3 locations in the Lower Mainland. It had, by all accounts, done very well for a while. But about 3 years earlier, she'd overextended. A 4th location that didn't perform. A supplier dispute that turned into a lawsuit. And then a commercial landlord who declined to renew her lease at the Kitsilano location. Her flagship, the one that had started it all, because the property had been purchased by a small development holding company based in Calgary. A company called Aldridge Properties. I hadn't known it was her shop. I want to be clear about that. My business manager, a meticulous woman named Corinne, who handled acquisitions, had flagged the Kitsilano property in a portfolio review as an undervalued commercial asset, and I'd approved the purchase without reviewing every tenant individually. I was in Calgary, I was busy. I had 43 properties under management by that point. Corinne called me after Sandra did. She'd gone back through the file. Did you know? She asked. No, I said, a long pause. Do you want me to do anything? I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it. Whether there was something I should do, some gesture, some accommodation. I thought about the hotel bathroom. I thought about the text on Ryan's phone. Tomorrow's going to be the hardest day of your life. But after that, we're free. No, I said. The decision stands. We didn't renew the lease because the property needed significant renovation and the tenant's payment history in the final 18 months was inconsistent. That's documented? Yes, Corinne said. Then nothing changes, I said. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. I don't want to pretend I felt nothing. I did feel something. I'm not sure it was satisfaction, exactly. It was more like completion. Like a sentence that had started 8 years ago in a Vancouver hotel bathroom had finally reached its period, quietly, without anyone having to raise their voice. I should tell you about Matthias. He came into my life the way most things that matter do, sideways, when I wasn't looking for them. A structurally engineer I'd hired as a consultant on a large residential project in Inglewood, referred by a colleague, 40 years old, originally from Winnipeg, recently relocated to Calgary after his own version of starting over. A different kind of loss, a different kind of grief, but the same particular quality of someone who'd rebuilt themselves deliberately. We spent 6 months on that project before either of us acknowledged that we were looking for excuses to be in the same room. He asked me for dinner, in the most technically awkward way I've ever witnessed, mid-meeting, mid-sentence about load-bearing walls, and I said yes before he finished asking. That was 3 years ago now. Matthias knows the whole story. I told him on our 4th date, at a table in the back of a restaurant on Stephen Avenue, over 2 glasses of Pinot Noir, and a shared plate of charcuterie I kept forgetting to actually eat. He listened the way he listens to everything, still, attentive, without filling the silences. When I finished, he said, "The person you described building, the firm, the properties, all of it, that happened because of what they did, not in spite of it." I told him that felt like a generous interpretation. He said, "It's the accurate one. I've thought about that a lot since." Owen came to Calgary for my company's 10-year anniversary dinner last spring. We held it at a small venue in Inglewood. Staff, a few long-standing clients, Howard, who at 72 still had more opinions about passive solar design than anyone I'd ever met. Matthias was there, Patrice was there. My mother flew in from Guelph, which required a minor miracle of coordination, and sat at the head of the table in her good cardigan, looking quietly radiant. Owen gave a toast that was mostly about the time he drove me across the Rockies in a rented truck in a snowstorm, and I refused to let him stop for more than 10 minutes, because I was convinced we'd lose momentum, emotional momentum, not vehicular, though the truck wasn't great either. Everyone laughed. I laughed. It was mostly accurate. Afterward, when everyone had left except the 2 of us and Matthias, Owen stood in the parking lot with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked up at the sign above the door. Aldridge Studio in simple brushed steel letters, and he said, "You know, I always thought you'd end up back in Vancouver." "Why?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "That's where you started." I thought about that for a moment. The hotel, the robe and the curlers and the lit-up phone screen, and the silence of realizing that the 2 people you'd trusted most had been planning their exit for 8 months. "No," I said. "That's where I stopped. This is where I started." Owen looked at me for a second, then nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. We drove home through the Calgary dark, the city spread out flat and glittering the way it does in clear weather, and I thought about how strange it is, how strange and specific, that the worst night of your life can become the exact point you'd eventually trace everything good back to. The moment you look at later and think, that's where it turned. I just couldn't see it turning. I couldn't see it then, I can see it now, and I think that's the whole story, really. Not the revenge, not the karma, though it came, just the turning. Just the long, quiet, unglamorous work of becoming someone the worst thing that ever happened to you couldn't define. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. If they're sitting somewhere right now in their own version of that hotel bathroom, reading texts they weren't supposed to read. You don't have to forgive them quickly. You don't have to forgive them at all. You just have to keep building, keep going. Take the job in the city where you don't know anyone. Drive through the snowstorm. Answer your brother when he calls on Sunday. And one day, 8 years later, you'll be standing outside the thing you built, looking at your name on the door, and you'll realize they thought they ended you. They just moved you out of the way so you could finally begin.